I'm not saying I'll automatically pick up your book if you tell me that there are 14 metalcore band names hidden throughout it as Easter eggs, but it definitely wouldn't hurt. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about Dark Bloom by Molly McCobb, which, yes, does legitimately, the author said, has 14 metalcore band names hidden throughout its Easter eggs. And I'm so annoyed because I did not catch them all. And I was highlighting several as I went along. And I'm like, oh, there we go, there we go, there we go. And I found several, but they're actually put in, and I think some of them are probably, you know, right there in plain sight, but it just doesn't feel like it's anything, like it's not like obvious. But I thought that was a fun little thing, and it was kind of just, it made me a little bit more interested to read this, even though I will say right off the bat, this is not my normal thing. It's pretty darn good though, and something that I think a lot of others would enjoy. So I'll mention that I happened to just catch this author was on Balding, which I will link down below too. I mentioned in the other video, definitely check them out. They do tons of author interviews. It's a great place to find new authors or hear from authors that you may know already as well. And it worked for me because that's why I ended up picking this one up. And so let's talk a little bit about Dark Bloom, which is also named after a metalcore song, and I feel like it's appropriate that I'm wearing a metalcore shirt too, so it makes sense. But anyway, so Dark Bloom is a post-apocalyptic kind of like horror type of thing as well, and it's a very character-focused story where we are looking at two characters, Kate and Nick. And Kate specifically, but both have a pretty traumatic past, and so it's kind of the idea of seeing, you know, somebody with a really traumatic past and where a sort of zombie apocalypse is almost freeing for them because they're escaping the situation that they're in. But their lives end up intersecting, and they end up traveling for a while and just kind of experiencing the world and that type of thing. And that's sort of what we're exploring. So this, I will say right off the bat, does get pretty dark. And there were a couple of comments on Goodreads, negative reviews calling it torture porn, which it most certainly is not. Like, First Law, maybe you could argue that. There's some other things like that, but this didn't feel like that at all to me. Although it's pretty dark, and we do have dual storytelling here, where we're seeing flashbacks of the characters. Again, Kate being the main character, but Nick, we see plenty as well of the pretty, horrific life as she went through very abusive relationship situations. So right off the bat, be aware that you're going to have that sort of thing, and it does get pretty dark, although it doesn't get overly graphic for the most part. It is, despite the subject matter, it is fairly, like, it's there, it's implied, like you know what's being talked about, but we're not really, like, at all, reveling in it or spending a lot of time going into the details, which for me was a positive. The other thing I will mention, and the author did mention this on when I saw her on Balding as well, there's no spice in this book. And I mentioned that because I actually read this with my wife, because I'm like, I started it and I'm like, this felt more like it was up my wife's alley than mine. And her biggest complaint was that there was no spice in it, and it felt like there should be. And I will admit, it does kind of feel like there should be. Now, I much prefer it not being. I'm not a big fan of sexual content in my books. So for me, it not being present made a lot of sense, but it did just kind of feel like it was going to be. So take that with what you will, because I will mention that if you're the kind of person who likes that sort of thing, you might be a little bit disappointed that it's not there. But if you're the kind of person who's expecting it and wouldn't want to pick up a book because of it, it's not really there. So that's definitely something that I'll mention. I think this does, as a very character focused journey, I think it works really well, and just kind of that exploration where there have definitely been other books doing that. The whole idea that humanity is more horrible than whatever the insert monster or creature is there too. So we are kind of exploring that, but it goes in some interesting directions, I think. And there's a little bit more going on with the sort of the undead type of thing as well. And even though they're not the huge focus here, and it does feel like there's more to explore here, with this world as well. Like, they're not just the typical zombies. Some of them are, but like some of them are a little bit different. And the children are a little bit more unsettling and have some extra little elements there, which I won't spoil, that make it even more kind of different. So I think it does take kind of a unique take. And again, just focusing on the character side more so than just the normal thing. There's even actually a scene which I feel was very pointed, where somebody's like kind of asking like, so what do you think happened? And they're like, oh, who knows? You know, it's a zombie apocalypse. And it kind of has that attitude of like, hey, you understand what a zombie apocalypse is. I don't need to spend two, page, I was going to say chapters, but I don't need to spend page count in general explaining what happened. Like, oh, it was tainted meat, or like, oh, it was an airborne. And so there's a very brief section where it's like, some people thought it was this, some people thought it was that. Nobody really knows exactly what happened. It just is what it is. And for me, I thought that was fine because, I imagine, you read some, that's a big part of it, but it's also like, you've read it before. You don't always need to go over in gritty detail with it. And again, this is focusing a little bit more on the characters. Now, I will say there are a couple of times throughout where some things just felt a little bit awkward with like the way they were phrased, just a couple of things. I think it was the times the author was just trying to do something that was specific. They wanted to say things a really specific way or bring something up and made it feel a little bit weird. There were a couple of times where this involved metal music in general, even though it wasn't band names specifically. So there were a couple of little things like that where it just felt a little bit strange. And there were a couple of moments where it felt like we kind of rushed through a couple of things as well, where things just sort of happened very quickly. But ultimately, I think it did some interesting things, and because of the fact that it was moving so very quickly, I never felt like, oh, this part's kind of boring or this or that. I just was moving right along. It's about 300 pages, I think, for Kindle at least is what it said, but it just read very quickly. Very easy to get through, and that focus. The characters themselves, I will say, it's not like the most, crazy original thing too. It's a woman who's coming from the past where she was, abused, and then an ex-soldier, that type of thing as well. So it's again, it's not like it's trying to be like this is the most original thing ever, but it's taking your kind of post-apocalyptic zombie sort of thing. It's taking some character archetypes again that you might have seen, but it's focusing really specifically on them as people and not them as just an archetype, and that's kind of the idea. And they're both kind of complex, and they don't always have the typical sorts of reactions as well, because we're focusing really on who they are and not just like this is what this type of character would do. It's what would this specific character do. And I think that's somewhat why some of the things that you would expect to see don't necessarily happen, because the specific characters have reasons why that's not going to work out. And so that's where some of the things that you might expect or be more predictable don't necessarily happen because of who the characters are actually as people. The ending as well is not at all what I would have expected. And so like I said, I'd be curious to see what more is going to go on here. And this is the kind of thing that I might kind of just throw on to try something different, because despite this, like I said, really not being my thing, I had a pretty good time with it. And I think I ended up about 3.5, rounded up to 4 on it. So a pretty solid time, something that I think was overall well written. There are, the few quirks of somebody writing a debut and hasn't fully figured out everything, which you sort of expect, but overall I thought was well written. And like I said, for me, honestly, just the kind of fun connection to metal made this a read that I was a lot more invested in than I might have otherwise been, just because kind of hearing the author explain that, the conversation, the title of the book, and it's one of those books that has like a playlist in the back that lists a bunch of metal songs and everything too. So it was just kind of a fun thing, and it made it a really fun, refreshing read to go in. And like I said, I'm tempted to reread this already because I want to go back and find the band names that I missed. So it's just like, it was, for me, that was a really fun engagement. So if the description of this didn't sound bad to you, and you also are like, ooh, that sounds fun, looking for the metal names, check it out as well. And otherwise too, I feel like some people who are more into this type of thing than I am also, I think, would really enjoy this, because immediately I started, I'm like, there's several people that came to mind that have very different tastes than me, but that I think might enjoy this. And so yeah, it's fun to try something different every now and then, and I had a pretty good time with this one. Overall though, those really are my thoughts on Dark Bloom by Molly McCobb. Let me know if you have read this or this type of thing and your thoughts on it, so I would be curious as well. Otherwise, make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the links in the description as always for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as the Wizardly Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun and we'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.